Steady go. Good evening, everybody. Very exciting, very special guest we have with us today, Dr. Durso, who you see here on the screen live and in person from Baltimore or Maryland, Johns Hopkins Medical Institution. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Everybody is, of course, busy now, Pesach coming and so forth. So first and foremost, thank you. We're dedicating our learning tonight to the memory of Devora Bas Bilha Avraham. Bilha Bas Devora Avraham. Sorry, you think I get it right after all these months? Her neshama should have an aliyah. And we're very, very honored, as I said, to have with us Dr. Durso. So, Doctor, first of all, thank you. 1,000 thank yous for joining us.
You're welcome. You'll have to pardon me. You know, my voice, I'm going to be sipping on a little of this hot water. But wearing a mask for 2 years now, believe this. No colds. I've got 8 grandkids crawling all over us all the time. Take off the mask one day at work. And I got a cold.
There you go.
You can't make this stuff up. So anyway, l'chaim.
L'chaim. Drink that up, make yourself feel better. So let's get started. Okay. Give us a little background. Who are you? Where are you from? And share with everybody else some of the things that I know that make you such an interesting character.
Well, yeah, I might be a character. I don't know how interesting, but you can tell if you listen to my accent, you'll know I'm from France, right? So
the south of France.
Yeah,
from the south of France.
That's right. That's right. So, no, I grew up in Texas, East Texas, and my background is a little different than probably everybody on this call. I was Italian-American Catholic. I went to school. Rabbi Epstein Baruch asked me a little about, what interested me in Yiddishkeit. I'll get to that because I think people sometimes, that's probably one of the things you want to know. But I would say even at an early age, Port Arthur was an interesting town. It's on the Gulf Coast. There's a lot of, it's kind of polyglot, a lot of languages, a lot of people, seaport town. And there were numbers of families that were immigrant Jewish families from Germany and Eastern Europe, friends of our family growing up with them. And so at a very early age, and you have to understand back in the 60s, the Holocaust was, very recent and very raw. And so for a kid like myself, kind of curious and learning and, meeting people, some of whom had just gotten escaped from Germany right before the war, it was an introduction. So I'll just say that at the beginning that, my interest in it began at a very early age. And then the rest is history. But, you can ask me any question you want about that, and I'll be happy to elaborate.
Well, I first met you more than 30 years ago when you lived in South Carolina. See, I've had all my friends on our Zoom. Now I'm having my brother's friends. So maybe, how did you wind up in South Carolina, and how did you meet my brother and become involved with Chabad? Can you share some of that background story?
Yeah. So going back just a second, like I said, I've gone to medical school in Houston. That's close to where I grew up. And residency in Alabama, the University of Alabama. And I met my wife there, who's Jewish. So one of my brothers-in-law was a resident with me and introduced us. And it was right toward the end of my residency. My wife and I moved back to Texas briefly because she was finishing her degree, ironically, from school in Texas. It's kind of one of those, coincidental small world things. And but when she finished with that, she and I decided that we would move back to her hometown, Columbia, South Carolina, where her then 3 brothers who are internists, Rabbi Epstein, Hesh Epstein knows them, were in practice, and we practiced together. And so anyway, that's how our life got there. But I'll also tell you, it's a little bit of a funny thing. So my wife and I met. I'm not Jewish. She is Jewish. We'd agreed that we're going to raise the family Jewish, but I certainly didn't have any deep understanding of what that was going to entail. And like a lot of Jewish people, she grew up with I'd say a strong identity as a Jew, but not a lot of knowledge about the details. And but anyway, that was our commitment. I'll just tell you one funny story about that, because when we first met, she wasn't able to go back home for the usual Pesach Seder that family would make every year. And so she said she invited me over. We were going to make one ourselves. I'm not Jewish, I don't know anything about it. we have these Maxwell House Haggadahs on the table. She set the table up. She brings out the symbols, sits them on the table, goes back in the kitchen. She's working. I'm looking at these symbols and I'm thinking this is like a Korean poo-poo platter. You know, I saw the shake bone and I'm thinking this is a good place to start. You know? It's like barbecued ribs. Anyway, she comes in and I'd ruined that part of it already. So anyways, I'm just, you know, we started from ground zero. That's the idea. So anyway, so we moved to Columbia, South Carolina, and to get to the point that you asked about, you know, your brother Hesh, how did I meet him? You know, ultimately we started becoming more and more interested in, you know, attending the synagogue she grew up in, and I was learning, and in fact I originally converted through this conservative synagogue that she was a member of, and there was a small, I'd say, little kahila of mostly fellas that were becoming religious, and you know, they took it seriously, and so anyway, they had a little little minyan on the side, if you will, but traditional minyan, and I joined that because it, you know, it really spoke to me, so to speak, if you will, and so anyway, you know, I became much more interested, if you will, in learning about it. In fact, I'd even go back to say that during the conversion process, you know, one of the books that I remember the rabbi gave us to read was one by a fellow Chaim Donen. It was called "To Be a Jew." Orthodox Jewish author writing this "How to Be a Jew." And I remember, you know, it was an interesting thing. I'm going through this conversion process, and there's, I don't know, half a dozen people in it. And I'm reading this, and it had this really beautiful discussions in there about this is where my voice gets Shabbos. You know, the beauty of Shabbos. It was just, you know, I'm reading it, and I'm looking around. Nobody's keeping Shabbos. I mean, it was interesting to me, but I'm reading it, and it sounds like a beautiful thing. People lighting candles, challahs, and families getting together at the table, and and then there's kashrus, you know, and why do we keep, you know, and it's a commitment, and it binds you to Hashem, and all these different things. But the interesting thing to me is that nobody around was doing it. You know, it was just, you know, it was an observation.
Academic.
You know, it was an observation I was making. So anyway, you know, the kahila that we were farming, you know, grew, and then there was a young family there that was really becoming religious, and I think the story's right. Hesh can correct me, but they wrote a letter to the Rebbe, I believe, if I'm remembering this correct, saying that there wasn't enough Yiddishkeit here. What could we do? And I believe that might have been, Hesh, you could jump in and tell me if I'm mangling the story or not telling it completely accurately, but I believe that started the ball rolling where Rabbi Epstein's brother, Hesh Epstein, his wife Chavi, and then moved down to Columbia. And, you know, I don't completely remember exactly the first time we met, exactly where that might have been, but in any case, we did. And I think it was on two levels. One is, I think we just personally hit it off. I think, you know, I like Hesh and I are close and still are. You know, I could just relate to him as a person in that sense. And then the other was he's hardworking, honest, available, knowledgeable, and, you know, was just what the doctor ordered, so to speak. I mean, I had a lot of questions, a lot I wanted to know. I wanted to learn, you know, I wanted to learn Gemara. I wanted to learn the Rambam. I wanted to learn, you know, about the halakhas of Shabbos and kashrus and all that. And, you know, he had time on his hands when he first got there. which was good for me. And so we would learn at lunch, and we'd do things, and I got involved with projects with him, the Sukkah-mobile, and you know, building, so just all kinds of things. So anyway, that's how we met. And I think he and Rabbi Mayer at the Muller, in fact, I used to play out baseball before I was Shomer Shabbos there was a Saturday baseball league, and they used to walk over and watch us play sometimes. Anyway, it was, you know, just a you know, very Hamish, very, very approachable, very, you know, very authentic, if you will. Yeah.
So you showed me while we were talking the picture of you and my brother visiting with the Rebbe. Can you hold up that picture and maybe share your
Yeah, in
story
fact,
about your
yeah,
visit to
this
Rebbe.
month, 31 years ago. Is that right? Yeah, I think I got my math right. Let me see about, yeah, can you see that?
Yeah, yeah. There you are.
There you go.
You're
Okay.
there's my brother with a dark beard. There's you looking the same. You
Yeah,
look
yeah,
like you
it's me
work took yours.
photoshopped
Take
in with the,
Amazing how I haven't changed a bit.
that's right. Yeah.
So
And that's
what's
the
that?
Rebbe.
What's that backstory? Tell us that. Tell us that. So many
Yeah,
of the
that
people on
actually,
the
that I
Zoom
looked
here
at
have-
on the date on that actually is my oldest daughter's birthday, the 3rd of March,
Oh wow.
1991. You know, I think it was one of those. I'm trying to remember what I think we'd gone up specifically just to go to 770, if I'm remembering correctly. We'd been up there for other reasons. There was a wedding too one time. I'm trying to remember the
Hirsch DeLynn, Andy DeLynn.
yeah, right, exactly, right. That's right.
His
That's
daughter
right.
lives here. He has a daughter who's married to a guy from Chicago that live here.
Oh, really?
Married to
Wow,
Mayor
yeah.
Burnett. The people on the Zoom know Mayor Burnett's wife.
Yeah.
Her maiden name is DeLynn, and her parents' wedding you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Maybe that's right. That's right. So anyway, we were there, and in fact, I think Mayor Mueller and his wife, who were newly married, had an apartment. We stayed with them, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And anyway, we were there, and it was one of the first of 2 times that we had a Yechidas, if you want to call it that, with the Rebbe. I remember he gave the dollar. I mean, I'm not a souvenir keeper, so immediately I took it out on the street and gave it to somebody that looked like they needed $1. Someone said, "You should keep that dollar." I said, "I don't think that's what the Rebbe's idea was. I think he meant for you to give it as a tzedakah." So anyway.
So that's wonderful that you had that chance. Many of the people on the Zoom tonight are, younger than 30 or just never had the chance.
Yeah, I get a
That's
lot of
wonderful.
mileage out of that when a shliach comes by the house and they tell me all about, Chabad.
I'm good. I know that one. So you're in Maryland now. How did you wind up in Maryland? What's the backstory there?
Yeah. Well, so going back, to Columbia, South Carolina, I was in practice there with my 3 brothers-in-law. My wife and I, became more and more observant, Shabbos and all. I will say there's another thing, an important thing about Rabbi Epstein I want to point out too, because I think it's negated this idea about the move in this way. So I'm actually was sitting at Andy DeLynn's house one day. That's where we had a little minion for a while there. And I'd gone through, as I mentioned, this conversion, and I'd actually been a regular part of the minyan and davening and led davening, spoke on holiday. I mean, the whole bit. Very earnestly thinking, everything's a-okay. And I pick up this book by Emanuel Shochet, who's a Jew, and it didn't take me more than about 2 or 3 pages to realize I wasn't. So I remember I was heartbroken, really. I mean, I really, done everything very sincerely and intended, taking it on the mitzvahs and all that. But I remember going and talking to Hesh about it, and he didn't really bat an eye. I mean, it was like, we made some accommodations, so made sure the minions and all, had the right number and, and so forth. But he immediately arranged, within a very short period of time for us to go down to Charleston, or over to Charleston, I guess, from Columbia. Rabbi Radinsky, Rabbi Mueller, they were, made a Besdin, and I converted. I don't remember whether it happened within, a couple of months or a month or 6 weeks or something like that. But I think it was the 25th of Tammuz, if I'm remembering correctly. And so anyway, just I want to put that out there, because there never was any conversation about that before that. And Hesh can speak for himself. I don't know exactly when he thought about it one way or the other, but anyway, I brought it up to him and we dealt with it, and it was a beautiful thing. And I will say that that we actually got married in Hesh's house, which was after our 2 children were born. So that was our chasana, if you remember that. Official chasana, not the one we
did very, very well.
With Judge Flowers, the circuit court in Alabama. So anyway. So anyway, we were becoming religious, and at one point, I mean, the small group, Hesh has done amazing work down there. Mayor Mueller's done amazing work. Now there's a bigger there's a bigger contingency.
Hesh, you paying these guys, Hesh?
Yeah.
I would want to just jump in and say that, of all the different challenges of being in a small city versus Chicago or other places like that, is the fact that people like Sam kind of come up and have this incredible sort of journey. And you really only heard the beginning of it. I'm sure Sam will share some more about it, but that when the time came for Sam to go to move on to Baltimore and Johns Hopkins, it's a bittersweet kind of thing, because clearly this is where he needs to be. But of course, we would love him to stay in Columbia, but it would never work for him to stay in Columbia, because obviously his destiny is elsewhere. And so that's the challenge, as you can imagine. With people of that caliber in our community, I have to say, kind of wish them well on the next level of their journey, because that's one of the real challenges in small communities.
Yeah, on both sides. I mean, for a lot of reasons, I can elaborate about that. But it's interesting. It was a beautiful time, and our families became very close. I'll give you an example. Our house was almost to the dot 4 miles from Rabbi Epstein's house. That's where the minyan eventually, was. And I would walk there regularly on Shabbos with my little daughters. Emily first, she and Avrami, his oldest, became buddies, friends, and then Sruli and Michelle. I mean, they were all about the same age. They'd sometimes walk back with us, but it was one of those things where when you have little kids, you can direct them and all. And eventually I said to my wife, who has been with me the whole way, they're either going to be Meshuggah or go off the derrick. I mean, it wasn't practical for us personally. I mean, I'm not saying that it can't be done, or that, Rabbi Epstein's been very successful with his family that way, but we didn't have those kind of network or connection and background. I mean, I don't come from a Jewish background. My wife's family's not, in the same level that we are, in the same way. Appreciative of it, but not in the same way. And so, it really was obvious to me, particularly at first, that we moved to a place where there was, more Mazdas, more, institutions, more support, more varieties of school, more ability for clinic, and then ultimately for marriage. To be honest with you, I was thinking ahead. I'll bring that back in a minute. But thinking ahead about that, and so what happened was I was trying to figure out how you're going to move. I mean, I had no experience with this. I'd moved into the family business, if you will. I didn't really have any. I didn't have to have any chachma to really figure that out. I just put up a shingle, and that's what we did. But I was looking around at cities, and we had some connections. The Deutsches in Atlanta, who was the head of the Atlanta Scholars Cohel, his wife was from Baltimore, and she introduced us to her parents, the Newbergers. We got to know them, and decided that Baltimore made a lot of sense. And so, I long story short, looked into Hopkins, and the rest was Bashert. I mean, it happened that they was able to be recruited to Johns Hopkins and got a position here, which, thank God, Hashem's help's been has flourished enough that we've been successful in Baltimore. But that's how we got to Baltimore, and that was the reason that we got to Baltimore. It's interesting. There was a guy, there was a math professor that kind of itinerant in a way, in the sense that he was between jobs, and he took a small position in Columbia. You'll remember Russell Handel, Hesh. And so anyway, brilliant guy.
Pay attention, Hesh.
What's that?
Pay attention, Hesh.
Yeah, that's right. So and so he used to come and stay with us some and have kiddush in Columbia. And then later we hooked up again here in Baltimore just a couple of years ago. And he remembered, he said, it's a funny thing. He said, we walked back. He said, why are you moving to Baltimore? I said, because my daughters are never going to find a shidduch here in Columbia. And he said, I always thought at the time, he says, I can't, this guy's crazy. These are like, they're like little kids. He said, sure enough, now thank God they're married. They live here in Baltimore. They've got kids. So,
That is beautiful.
So I have
Nira,
a
you wanted to say
question.
something? Yeah.
You painted the beautiful pictures for us, and it's really fascinating to listen to you. But because you came from a very different background, was there any point in all of this that you felt resentment? I mean, Judaism is beautiful, but there are lots of rules and restrictions and forbidden and
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Talmud behind me. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and reason I actually brought up. So you had anticipated this. I'll go back a sec. I mentioned that I was raised Catholic. Okay, and I'll tell you what the relevance of that is. So back in the day, Catholics actually had holy days of obligation, like a Shabbos, you know what I mean? They were supposed to be where they were supposed to be. They had days they couldn't eat this and that, couldn't eat fish on, meat on Friday, things like that. You had to fast. You couldn't eat so long before such and such. We got up every day. I mean, I went to Catholic schools, it's so to speak, davened, if you want to call it. We had to be there. I mean, people, it was like, you weren't a minion, but, you were expected to be there. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because my background was one of relative structure religiously. That was what I was accustomed to. Theologically, even at an early age, it didn't fit it was like a coat that didn't fit. But from from the standpoint of just organization and kind of, the kahila, there were parishes. Port Arthur's, the big Catholic family. I was Italian, as I said. And so it actually fit. And so ironically, I think for many American Jews, particularly on the more liberal side that are, not as used to the structure, there's more, do what you feel like doing kind of thing. I don't mean critical about it. I'm just pointing out from a lifestyle and organizational standpoint. I think it was harder, ironically, for my wife early on than it was for me in that respect. The second thing is I'm just blessed. My mother, who's a very religious Catholic, has been tremendous in just loving us and our family. And my father died when I was relatively young. She remarried a wonderful man, and they were always very accommodating. We went down there, we could make Shabbos in their house. They made sure we had all the kosher food we wanted. The kids, they got whatever, when they got presents on Hanukkah, they got a Queen Esther doll and what I'm saying? So I don't know that everybody has that experience, but I did. And so that part was it. And the third thing I would say, as far as restrictions go, like they say, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein used to say, "Oi, it's hard to be a yid." You know what I mean? It said that's the most destructive thing. People, I relate to that in the sense that, first of all, when we were in Colombia, it was like a new frontier, and there was much to do, and to Rabbi Epstein's, credit, I mean, we focus on the positive things, and also not that you have to do every single thing. I didn't like jump in the deep end overnight. You know what I mean? It was a gradual process. And also, I didn't feel like I had to take on every single chumrah.
How long the gradual process took over?
What's that?
You say it was a gradual process. It took over for how long?
I didn't hear you very well.
She's asking, what was the trajectory? How long would you say your process went from?
Yeah. I would say before Chabad, so to speak, I mean, that process was a couple of years. We were married, we'd moved, was in attending some of the services at the conservative synagogue. The reason that process was a little on the slow side of I'm being very candid with you, is it wasn't that authentic to me, and it didn't really fit. I mean, it wasn't so much on my end as it just wasn't appealing. The real deal did appeal to me, and it kind of was like, it was, like I say, it was like putting on a jacket or a suit that fits, so I don't remember that as being a particular struggle. But I also remember feeling like, well, I'll give you one example. So I know Rabbi Baruch Epstein asked me some questions about, like, what does my being a doctor have to do with it? I'll give you an example. So, there's a lot of halakkas that are relevant to the physician and his role in healing, how much you can do on Shabbos, so on and so forth. So, when you're in Colombia, I don't know, I'll put it this way. I had to do what I did, and I thought was within the bounds of what I could do. Now that I'm in a bigger community with, more liberty to, get back up and things like that, I can be even more, restrictive about that. I don't know if that's really answering your question, but my point I'm trying to make is I've always tried to use some cycle about what aspects I can do within halakha, if you get the point.
So let me jump in with a question. So you moved from Columbia to Baltimore, even within Chicago, and some of the people, and this is one of the beauties of Zoom, they don't all live here in the hood. They're not all,
right.
they don't all have the secret password
right.
to all the goodies. And this is an opportunity for them. What were some of the maybe unexpected challenges of moving from Columbia into a big giant from community like Baltimore? How did that work with your wife and your children? What were your children's ages? And now you're relocating them, and
that's a very good question. There's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of parts to that answer I can give you that I think probably would be of interest. But let me break it into some pieces. So the first part was I was a little fish in a little pond in Columbia, and now I'm a little fish in a big pond. Okay,
so you feel lost. You could feel like you lost.
Yeah, you could feel lost. It's like a lot of things. There's pros and cons. So when you're in the little shtetl, so to speak, every person makes the minion, you know what I mean? And so there's a lot of responsibility. When you get to the big city, so to speak, you could be lost, but the other thing is you have to just pay attention that you make yourself part of activity, because I could go to any shul at any time. I've got literally on my street, I don't know what, a half a dozen shuls, literally. I mean, on my street alone, just, up and down the neighborhood. And so in a certain sense, you can almost choose not to be that committed. It's a little paradoxical is the point I'm trying to make.
Because nobody notices if you don't show up.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I could be, I daven at 1 million in the morning because that's when they daven. I daven a different one in the afternoon because that's what I have to do. But my point about it is you can also paradoxically not be as committed. And so in a certain sense, ironically, you have to work on that. Whereas when I was in Columbia, to some extent, for a little while there, I mean, I don't know if Hesh would look at it this way, but for me, I mean, it was like, if you're not there, you're not, there isn't any there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you have to be, you're really committed to that. So that's on the one
you're
side.
at the other minion.
Huh?
You can't say you were at the other minion.
Yeah. Right. If you did, it's not a kosher menu. Right?
So you're at the Yiddish Daf Yomi Shir in Columbia.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in that respect, it was that way. Now the other thing about it is that we did want to move because of the girls, and that was a bit of a tension. I mean, really, I'd gotten an offer to go to Hopkins actually 4 years before we moved, and I would have moved then, but it turned out it wasn't quite the right time for my wife and the family. And it was a little bit of a tension because we didn't want the girls to be much older than they were. I think they got there, frankly, kind of in the nick of time, if you will. They got into the Beis Yaakov. They were not too old, but it wasn't an easy transition in that respect. And for my wife, she was leaving her family. So, Yiddishkeit aside, it was a big, big deal. Less so for me because, they were my in-laws and all, but it's not the same as leaving your home, the parents. And for the parents, it was difficult to be candid about it. I mean, and truthfully, and I put myself in their shoes. I mean, they thought I was Meshuggah. I mean, they did. I started wearing a yarmulke. My father-in-law said, "You're going to lose your practice. People aren't going to, they don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah." He was right. I understood, the point. I mean, he wasn't crazy. It was like, I had enough confidence that we weren't crazy, but I understood where it was coming from. So that happened. I will tell you a bit of an interesting story. It's a little, I'll make it short, but it's a little involved. His mother died years before my wife was born. He was a store owner downtown Columbia, a mashulach from Ner Israel, the big yeshiva here in Baltimore, main yeshiva here in Baltimore, was coming through raising money. He made at that time would be a very sizable donation for a perpetual yahrzeit for his mother. My wife is named after Liberazel. We moved to Baltimore. It was a difficult move. I already said that. My wife is driving back from Beis Yaakov one morning. We just got admitted. She got lost. You wouldn't know the geography here, but just take my word for it. She wound up on the Ner Israel campus, which was not a direct line from where she was. You really had to be lost, is my point. And it's way out. It's out in the country. And so she gets out. I'm making the story a little bit short, but she's lost. She gets in there. There's this whole, place full of young men learning, steiging, learning, everything they were going. So she, one of the Rebbeim said, welcome, what can I do for you?
Can I help you?
Can I help you? Yeah. So she does.
One of these is not like the others.
Yeah. And so she says, well, and, by the way, I think that my father, had made this donation in Ner Israel. And he said, well, if she did, there must be a memorial plaque to this Liberazel, your grandmother, and he'll help you find it. So they go to look for it. They find the plaque. That day was her yahrzeit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that day was her yahrzeit. My wife did not know that. That day, my wife felt this is where my family belongs.
That's beautiful.
This is where my family belongs.
So now you've been in Baltimore for how long? 20 years, 25 years?
27 years.
27. So in the look back, it was rough going. Would you say you consider yourself completely ingrained in the community? Do you still find it difficult? How in the look back now, somebody, let's say, who's thinking about getting started on a journey that's somewhat similar to yours, what can they look back on 25 years hence?
Well, here's the thing. I would say, no, we feel very, Hesh's mother said something to my wife, Lorna, when we were getting ready to move, because my wife, as I said, understandably, she was a little nervous about it. As my husband, she also confessed, might have thought I was kind of mashugana too. But she understood the principles and why we were doing it. But Hesh's mother told her, believe me, you'll look back and when you see your children, you'll know that you did the right thing. I remember saying it. She was at Hesh's. I remember we were in the kitchen when she said it. And sure
Hesh,
enough,
go wake mommy up and get her on the phone. They're there now. They're in Columbia. Go wake mommy up.
I remember it exactly. And she was 100% right. And I remember my father-in-law saying the same thing. You were 100% right. When he saw the Ehrlichia children that were his granddaughters, he saw it, it was and my mother-in-law too, I was showing, same thing. And so, to answer your question, no, and we are very ingrained here. I have, like two lives in a sense. I've got my life at work, and which I'm very much, I've been, very integrated into. And then we've got the life in the community, and my wife is very integrated in the community. Our daughters live here, their children in day schools. One of my daughters teaches in a day school. The other, and we were fortunate too, in that both of our sons-in-law's families are from the area. One is actually from Israel, but they had been from Baltimore originally, and so on and so forth. But they certainly have connection here. And then the other is, from Silver Spring. So we are definitely part of the community. We've been very involved. Many of the organizations, Shul for sure, but others too. So
you got the ultimate return on your investment.
Yeah, I would say, and it's a funny thing, because at Hopkins, I'll give you an example. So my former chairman often would bring to me offers, he'd say, well, they're looking for a chair of medicine at, you name it, Hudson University or wherever. Even one time, this one I had to actually think about it. It was actually being the head of a hospital system, Hadassah hospital system in Israel. And I thought,
Oh, wow.
that's hard. Yeah, that was something.
That one caught your attention.
That caught my attention. I did actually give him a call and just have a schmooze, but then decided this just wasn't going to happen because we couldn't get all the kids there and everything. But anyway, he would bring these things to me, and I would always remind him, said, I didn't come to Baltimore to be at Hopkins. I came here because of the Jewish community. and I'll tell you another funny thing about that. There's a couple of funny things. And so, the reason I brought up work is because there are two things. One is we're part of the community, but I think I've taken my role as being a shliach at work seriously. I don't run around, beating people over the head of it, but I have a regular learning session with one of the chiefs there. At his mother's, he was sitting Shiva, and I said, what can we do? I said, you grew up in Brooklyn, you could, you probably learned something back then. He and I have been learning Masechah Shabbos now for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Once a week,
Beautiful.
I'll tell you, and there are many examples like that. There's a young man right now as a resident who's, we've gotten numbers of, from residents into the program now because, through the fact that, there's a role model there that can show them what to do. So, it's been an important piece of my life too, but as I pointed out to him, and I will say when I was installed in a chair here, and the fella that was my chair then, Rabbi, I always call him Rabbi Weisfeld. That's a funny joke in the family. I always say I start by, but it's Myron Weisfeld. So he's Jewish, and he made the whole affair kosher. I mean,
oh, nice.
like momish kosher. He was very proud of himself. He said, this is the first time, you'd have to know the history back, but Hopkins at one time, they weren't so friendly to Jews. But now they are. But the point being is that the whole affair was catered, the same caterers we had at our children's wedding. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Rabbi Hauer was, it was a wonderful event. And now that he's retired, every time, I go by, visit with him, whatever, he's got to tell me he goes to shul regularly.
Nice.
He's always got to. He's always got to tell me.
You've absorbed and you've given.
He's always got to tell me, I'm going to shul. Don't worry, I go to shul.
That's beautiful. Dr. Durso, thank you. 1,000 thank yous. We really, really appreciate it. It's gone much longer than we usually do. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you. Engaging. Feels like we could talk and talk and talk. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you for being with us.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Yes, sure.
Doctor, do you know Rabbi Gopin and his son? He's at Hopkins. He's in Baltimore there. He's at Hopkins.
What's his last name again?
Gopin.
No, I don't, but I'll look him up. I'll look that up. What department is he in?
No, he's a rabbi there. He's a shliach there.
Oh, okay. So he's the shliach that would be on the Homewood campus. That's the undergraduate campus. I'm in the School of Medicine.
Okay.
And so, I actually have attended one of his fundraising dinners a couple of years ago, actually. But lovely fellow, lovely family. But I don't know him.
We'll have him on a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, Dr. Durso, really, thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Interesting and fascinating.
Kosher Pesach.
And Kosher V'Sameach to you. Yeah. And thank you. And hello to your family.
Thank you.
Nachas and Nachas. Remember, everyone, tomorrow night, 8:30 for Mimer. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you. I'll send out the recording. This was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And Hash, make sure Hash pays you for all those nice things you said about it.
Yeah. Okay. He's paid me. He's played me plenty. Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Thank you. 1,000 thank yous. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.